And for more on this, we're now being joined by Jonathan S. Tobin, Editor-in-Chief of Jewish News Syndicate. He's joining us live from New York. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mr. Tobin. I want to first start by asking you that the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, has voiced open frustration at the government's failure to address questions of a post-war plan for Gaza. Meanwhile, War Cabinet member Benny Gantz also agreed with Gallant. How do you assess the growing rift and cracks within the Israeli War Cabinet affecting the on-ground operations in Rafah, especially with Netanyahu being adamant on Rafah incursion?
Well, I think we should separate the political maneuverings from the military imperatives. Gallant and Gantz are eager to undermine Netanyahu politically, but in the end, they still support an operation in Rafah. Gallant says he doesn't, he wants a post-war plan, but there can be no post-war plan until the war is over. So I don't think, I think this is, much of the international press is always eager to seize on anything. Oh, Netanyahu is falling. He isn't. He still has the support of the majority of his coalition. There aren't going to be new elections because that coalition isn't going to vote itself out of office. And in the end, as much as there is disunity about Netanyahu's tenure and also about Gallant, because also he bears as much responsibility for everything that has happened as Netanyahu does as the defense minister, in the end, there is a broad consensus that Hamas must be eliminated if Israel is going to live in security, if the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have been forced to flee their homes in southern Israel and in northern Israel because of the firing from Gaza and Hamas and Hezbollah and Lebanon, they can't go home until this war is resolved and Hamas is defeated. So as much as the political maneuvering continues nonstop, that's a democracy. But in the end, Netanyahu and the Israeli government, even with some of his reluctant coalition partners, they will push ahead and eliminate Hamas because they have no alternative, because the majority of Israeli people know that this must happen.
Mr. Tobin, you speak of how majority of Israeli people, they know that, rather they support that that Hamas should be eliminated, but there's also a growing demonstration in Israel regarding the hostages that are still in Hamas's captivity. And if we can say that Netanyahu is isolated on many fronts right now, just a follow-up, do you think that this is a tipping point for the Israeli Prime Minister?
In a word, no. As much as there are many reasons why he ought to go, after all, October 7th happened on his watch. He's been in power for an awfully long time, and there are a lot of people who don't like him. But I think people always underestimate his political abilities. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked or worked on stories about, I guess this is the end of Netanyahu. Someday it will happen, but it will not happen now, because this war will go on to a finish. It will not happen until after the war is resolved and Hamas is eliminated, because the Israeli people know that they cannot live with a genocidal Islamist terrorist organization on their border. They tried for 17 years to live with that. October 7th proved that that was impossible. And so whatever happens eventually to Netanyahu, and someday he won't be prime minister of Israel, but he'll remain in power as long as this war is going on, as long as the mission that most Israelis want him and the rest of the government to fulfill is still there for them to do.
Mr. Tobin, let's also talk about Biden's Israel weapons policy. I want to seek your assessment on that. While U.S. has established Gaza pay to boost aid supplies on one hand, on the other hand, Washington is poised to send $1 billion in weapons to Israel. So how do you assess Washington's policy towards the war in Gaza at the moment?
Well, President Biden has been talking out of both sides of his mouth about the war practically since October 7th. He began with a strong position of strong support for Israel and support for the eradication of Hamas, but he got strong pushback from the left wing of his party, which is hostile to Israel, and he's been backing away. But of course, it depends on which day you ask him. On the one hand, he pledged last week to support Israel never to forget what Hamas had done and for Hamas to be eliminated. Then the next day he said if Israel goes into Rafah, which is a predicate for the elimination of Hamas, he will cut off arms. But then he got enormous pushback, and now he's releasing other arms. The political equation, which I think is sometimes misunderstood by people who are hostile to Israel, is that as much as Israel may be unpopular elsewhere in the world, the overwhelming majority of Americans, every poll shows, support Israel, are against Hamas. And I think there has been a miscalculation within the White House, which they are seeing, that by backing away from Israel, by worrying more about losing votes on the left, on the extreme left of his own party, he's forgetting that there are far more centrist pro-Israel votes in the center to be lost. And that's why he's backing back towards Israel. He doesn't want to be entirely in one camp or another, because if he does betray Israel, if he does cut off Israel, if he does basically allow Hamas to survive, he's pushing for hostage deals that would not even get all the hostages back. That will work against him in the fall election. And he's losing right now to Donald Trump. He's not losing because he's too pro-Israel. He's losing for a host of other reasons, and he'll lose more votes if he continues in this path of basically appeasing Hamas and its Iranian supporters.
Right, Mr. Tobin, thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION with your insights.
Thank you.